All right. Now, this is a line of thoughts that have been sold into the mind of people for several centuries. Of course, it's not only about Egypt, not be Africa, and also for the fact that Africa don't even have a history. It's just like you have a people that have been existing for several millennia, and they don't have a history of existence. Like they just came from the sky, I don't know, or from the ground, or they germinated from the tree. Even if you germinate from the tree, there is a history of you from being a flower to a fruit to becoming a seed, dying and germinating. Even plants have history. Even trees, even flowers, those are history. Do you think, historically speaking, since you deal with history, there is any significance? I mean, any consequences of this fabrication to the mind, to the behavior of the people? Do you think it have any importance or it doesn't make any difference?
Oh, I think it's critically important. I think the way that we understand history of an area and of people, it definitely affects our modern conceptions of those people because it shapes our language, and the way we talk about people, the way we think about people. So it's absolutely critical. And picking up on your point that, even a flower has history, even a tree has history, I totally agree with you. And part of this problem of the old narrative of, Africa had no history, part of that problem was a sort of hierarchical view of history that existed at that time. So I'm talking 150 years ago, 100 years ago, where historians felt that there was only value to a history that involved written records and a history that involved urban populations. And we have very much moved away from that view. We now, I would say most people would no longer accept that view anymore. They do see the importance in cultures that have no written records, in cultures that are living non-urban lifestyles. But that kind of hierarchy to history was part of the problem, where people weren't saying what you just said. Oh, even a flower has history, right? Every population group has history. Every human being has history, partakes in human history. And that is critically important that we continue to stress that, because to say the opposite is completely dehumanizing, right? If you look at a particular population group and you say, oh, they don't have written records, they don't really share in human history, you have just dehumanized them and made them something other than human. And that's completely unacceptable.
What I want to ask you, no, okay, I'm not really going to drag that line any further than that because if at the time they were talking about the fact that Africa have no history, maybe because they didn't know that there was a 12th century Maya Empire bigger than the whole of Western Europe. So that didn't make any sense. They didn't know of ancient Zimbabwe. Okay, that didn't make any sense. They didn't know of the manuscript of Timbuktu. Those are written texts. So I want to go back again to what I was saying before. The idea that in Egypt, maybe we just tell the people, do this particular study. This is the one that you are going to look for. Dig this part. If you find this part, this is something. But if you find anything other than this, don't regard it. Is it possible that we could actually be doing this artificial selection of history in order to justify a certain claim? Is it possible like this?
It's possible. Yeah, the problem is that all of these systems sort of hang on to one another. So let's say that I am a scholar who I need funding to fund my research, right? So I apply for funding, but if my research project isn't interesting to the funders, then I won't get funding and I can't do my research, right? So I have to come up with a project that is interesting to whoever I'm trying to get funding for. And once I get that funding, then maybe I can go do that research, and then I need to publish it. But if my research isn't interesting to any of the research journals that I want to publish in, then they won't publish it, right? It'll get rejected by the peer reviewers, or, you know, just turned away before it even gets to peer review, whatever. So all of these systems hang on one another. You know, the funders may have no relation to the people who publish my research, but all of those things have to line up for me to do research and get it published. So I think what you're suggesting about artificially selecting research projects, it happens, and it's not necessarily with any sort of ill will or bad intention. It's just that researchers need a lot of things to fall into place from a lot of different systems in order to do their research, write it up, get it published.
That is very interesting. All right, when you were saying that, I was thinking, say maybe, for example, the Nigerian government was powerful enough to organize an expedition to Egypt to do a research about the origin of Egypt. Do you think they will get the same result that American expedition will get if American government send experts to study Egypt?
Well, it's an interesting question you ask. The thing is that every person, even if they're not from different parts of the world, even if they're from the very same part of the world, every person brings their own interpretation to the evidence that they're looking at. So let's pretend that I have a twin sister, which I don't, and we were raised together, and we're on this archaeological dig together, and we find a pot. I might interpret that pot based on the evidence I'm seeing as, you know, having one particular function, and she may interpret it a different way, looking at the same pot, but maybe pulling on some different evidence than I'm pulling on, and she may come up with a different interpretation. And so, and that's people coming from the same culture. So you talk about two teams from two very different parts of the world coming and doing work in Egypt. I think it's quite likely that different interpretations would be brought to the evidence by the two teams, because they're coming from different backgrounds and they're coming from different educational systems, and maybe they're asking different questions of the evidence as well. So let's say our evidence is this pot that I've just found. You know, I might want to know, what was this pot used for? You might want to know, who were the people using this pot? So we might even ask different questions of the evidence itself. And this is part of the exciting thing about being a researcher, is that it's not a simple sort of open and shut case. It's not like, okay, here's a pot, this is what it was used for, here's who used it, end of story. The story, in a sense, is never over, because we're constantly thinking about the evidence in new ways. So for instance, let's just say climate change, for instance. This was something that researchers 30 years ago weren't thinking about when they did their research. But today, it's very difficult to think about these ancient climate-scapes without thinking about climate change, whether it's climate change in antiquity or climate change today. So that's an example of new questions that are being brought to bear on evidence.